All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Boley. I'm the career manager at the Career and Internship Center here at the University of Baltimore. I'm joined today by Tony Delaney, LCPC Clinical Case Manager for the Office of Student Support and the Dean of Students Academic Center, also at the University of Baltimore. And we're here to talk to you today about the topic of job search pains and managing strain with regards to mental health throughout the job search process. Over the course of the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box along the way. We'll be monitoring that over the course of time as well, and this presentation will be available publicly via recording in the future. So first and foremost, we want to start by discussing a little bit about things from my perspective, which is the career perspective, talking about job searching and how the job search has changed over the course of the last year during the pandemic, which has been a major factor with regards to how people's job searches have been approached and also the mental and emotional well-being of all of us as we've been navigating this. Tony will be spending some time on the back half of this presentation, really going into more depth about stress management and how to effectively navigate this process in a healthy manner. So speaking about what we know from a career job search, career services perspective, from a pure data perspective, we know that the job market was hit very hard early last year in 2020 by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we do know that the job market has been in the process of recovering for the last year. We've seen pretty substantial progress in a lot of areas. However, the market is not completely back to where it was pre-COVID-19. It is projected that it will take a little bit longer. It may take at least another year before it gets fully back, if not beyond where it's currently at. A couple more niche areas that we wanted to touch on. We did see some increases in unemployment that were much more sharp for women than they were for men. We also saw that low wage workers saw a much sharper decrease in employment. And we've seen that even since the market has begun recovering, unemployment has remained elevated for Black and Hispanic workers particularly. It has been down across the entire spectrum of identities, but it remains at a much more elevated level for Black and Hispanic workers particularly. In addition, speaking to a point that Tony will elaborate on a little bit more later, we see that sustained unemployment and underemployment has had an adverse effect on people's physical and mental health, not just with regards to their own well-being, but also with regards to their mental and emotional outlook of their job and career prospects. Pew Research identified that about 50% of unemployed adults did say that they have a pessimistic outlook, either slightly or very pessimistic, with regards to their job outlook for the future. And that 2/3 of the surveyed adults in the United States indicated that they have considered a change in their career. So we're seeing a lot of people trying to figure out what is the way that we can effectively navigate this situation? What tools or techniques can I do in order to set myself up for the best career success possible? Because if I'm not able to find something in my current field or in the field that I went to school to go into, do I have to pursue a different option? Do I have to simply wait it out and see where things go from here? Nobody's entirely sure of what to do, which adds another level of uncertainty to the entire process and tends to lead us to think to the worst. So overall, we're seeing a bunch of new factors and new questions popping into people's heads. And I think it's important to really keep all of these in mind because they will be pivotal factors when you are considering your own job search, which I'll talk with you a little bit about some effective steps for that shortly. But some things that people now have to think about that we didn't have to think about nearly as much as we did previously, if at all previously, prior to this past year. What work style is possible for me, depending on physical health conditions, being immunocompromised, for example? Some people may not be able to work in person at all or in a hybrid capacity at this point in time. Remote may be your only option, or perhaps you're in a position where you've either been vaccinated or you are simply in a position where you're able to work in person to some extent, or maybe in person and remote are both options for you. This expands your job search prospects because it expands the total number of options of jobs that you could consider applying for. But another big question with that comes into play of how do I keep myself and anyone that I'm living with safe? Because certainly family and other factors such as those will play into how to make effective, safe decisions while job searching. Are companies in my field hiring? Many fields saw bigger dips in employment opportunities compared to others simply based on the fact that those fields didn't translate quite as quickly or as seamlessly to virtual working. We saw that, for example, in information technology, simulation, and game design, as a couple examples of majors here at the University of Baltimore, the fields transitioned pretty seamlessly to a virtual environment where the employment opportunities stayed relatively stable. But other majors, such as ones like history or integrated arts, we saw that there was a lot of fluctuation with regards to opportunities that was available. So you need to think clearly about what industry you are interested in pursuing in order to make sure that you know whether or not the opportunities, what the relative prevalence of opportunities is. Those are the words. What does the job search process look like right now in a virtual environment? If you're somebody who typically would go to open networking events, career fairs, for example, those kinds of opportunities are very scarce at this point, if at all available. So the job search process now is looking completely differently, in the sense that that process that was becoming more virtual anyway over the last half a decade or so, is now significantly more virtual. It also means that way more virtual applications are going out than ever before, which means that companies are being flooded with applicants for positions where there are fewer positions available and more people in need of job opportunities. So the process is going entirely virtual at this point, and that tends to include not only the application process and maybe even the initial resume review, but also the interview process, which is now becoming mostly virtual. Most companies taking that stance, especially if they have transitioned to either a hybrid or a virtual format. Which leads into the next question, which is, how do I even interview virtually? What are the things that we need to think about? I tell people all the time that virtual interviews do cause us to have to think about different factors compared with in-person interviewing. If I'm interviewing in the comfort of my own home, then I have to make sure that I have a stable internet connection. I have to make sure that I don't have any distracting noise or images in my background. I have to make sure that I have good lighting. Whereas when you're going into the company's office to interview with them, you don't have any control over those things. So it's a stressor that is not in your mind. But now, having to interview virtually, these are new stressors that we have to consider that we did not have to consider previously. And how do I network without being in person, right? Career fairs, in-person interactions have been one of the strongest ways for people to network and to then get informal connections to job opportunities, which we know do make up the majority of the securing job opportunities out in the market, is typically done through networking or in-person or direct referrals. So how do I do networking? How do I leverage tools such as LinkedIn, for example, and other social media platforms or virtual networking options in order to set myself up for success? Now, that's a lot of different questions, a lot of different things to have to think about, right? And trying to think about all of them at once is going to be daunting and overwhelming. So what we want to do today, and Tony will talk about it more from, again, a health management standpoint, I want to talk with you a little bit about how you can take your job search step by step, from the very beginning of it, getting into the latter stages of it, so that you're taking the approach in a way that will allow you to manage it efficiently, and as a result of that, in a way that will typically reduce the overall amount of stress that you're feeling throughout the process by taking it one step at a time. So the first step that I always say when you're managing your job search is you have to start with self-reflection. You have to understand your own circumstances in order to know what kind of things you have to be considering during the job search. So before you even think about what kind of job you want, what kind of what your resume is going to look like, things like that, start with yourself. Start with understanding you. What do you need from a job, from the opportunity that you're going to be pursuing at this point in time? This may be from an income standpoint. This may be when you're considering virtual or remote opportunities. It may be considering location. It may be considering a combination of these factors. Everyone's story is different. And so I'm not in a position to say what factors here will be most important, but that's where you need to take the time to think about your own personal circumstances, your family circumstances, home circumstances, et cetera, and ask yourself, what are my needs at this point in time? Do I need a job that's remote? Do I need a job that pays above a certain income level? Things like that. From there, you go to step two, which is you have now identified those needs. And I would suggest writing these down because I find that to be the easiest way to really manage it rather than having all of this in your head. Putting it on paper makes it a lot easier to organize it and keeps your brain from running at full speed all the time. Is now that you have your list of needs, you've identified what they are. Now we have to develop a priority order for them. What is the most important thing for you in the job that you're searching for? What is the next most important thing? What's the next most important after that? The reason that we do this is because by understanding your priorities, you can more easily narrow down the job options that are available to you. If you simply say, I'm going to apply for every job that is an IT position that's out there, and then you go through the process of reading all these job descriptions and you're getting to the end of them and finding, oh, they don't meet my needs from an income perspective, from a location perspective, etc., then you end up feeling like you've wasted your time. And that tends to contribute to burnout in the job search process, spending all of this time reading all of this material, trying to take in this content and understand these job opportunities, only to find out that they don't actually meet your needs and you wouldn't even really be in a position to apply for them, even if you wanted to. So you have to understand what your priorities are with that first, because that will allow you to more easily narrow down what jobs even meet your requirements. What are your non-negotiables, where you can say, okay, this job is meeting my top need from an income perspective, maybe, or all the jobs that I have on my list right now, these are all remote jobs and I needed them to be remote jobs. That's great. Now you know that you can start proceeding to the next step. The next step is narrowing the search down by the type of job. What kind of job are you looking for? Meaning the field, ideally you're looking for something that will further you in your career interests, your long-term interests. For most of you, that's going to be directly tied into the major that you are studying here at the University of Baltimore. But as a general rule, you want to think about what kind of job opportunity are you seeking. Now that you know what your needs are from a personal perspective, you can start to look for job opportunities that match those needs by using specific keywords to get a sense of, the industry terminology. So for example, somebody interested in UX UI work might look for UX designer positions that meet their personal needs, or UX researcher positions that meet their need, information architect positions that meet their needs. Those are just a couple different examples. But they have to start by understanding what they need from a personal perspective, so that they don't spend their time reading through all these different positions that wouldn't actually give them what they need in order to live a happy and healthy life at this point in time. Next is really identifying your tools. Now that let's say you know what kind of jobs you want, you know the jobs that you're interested in applying for, and now you know what you need. That's great. Now we can start really searching, actively searching. And what I suggest to people with this is keep your tool selection simple when possible. The reason for this is there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different effective, useful tools out there for job searching and career management. And there are even more that are less than effective. But the reason that I bring this to your attention is because when you try to pick and choose between all of these different tools, again, you're forcing your brain to try to do so many things at once that it tends to overwhelm us. And that makes it a lot harder to focus on the core thing, which is reading the job descriptions and understanding if the job meets our needs. So personally, I recommend narrowing your toolbox down to a couple tools at most at a time. Maybe you try using a couple tools, they don't work out for you, then you can look at a couple other ones and try to switch over to those. The couple that my office recommends in particular that I find to be very useful for people. Number one for research is ONET Online. This is a tool that gathers data from different job opportunities from people working, where they talk about what things different jobs do, what kind of education level you would need to be qualified for certain jobs, what kind of skills those jobs need. And that gives you a great idea of what kind of whether or not the job would match up with what you're looking to do, as well as understanding what kind of skill set you would need in order to do that job well, which gives us a great way to understand how to frame our resumes and our application materials. From a pure job searching perspective, Career One Stop is a fantastic website. It is, as the name suggests, a one-stop shop for career related support. So they have information on resume writing, they have information on interviewing. And in particular, their job search tool is one that I found to be very effective even during the hardest months of when COVID-19 was hitting here in the US. We were still seeing a large influx of job opportunities being posted through Career One Stop. And another reason that it's so useful is that it pulls from a variety of different job searching websites. So Career One Stop pulls from Indeed.com, for example. It pulls from Career Builder. It pulls from the National Labor Exchange, which pulls some federal contracting opportunities and positions. So it gives you more bang for your buck because they're all in one place instead of you having to try to look through 5 different websites. You can do it all in one spot, which makes it a lot more easily navigable. It makes it a lot easier to manage, and it limits the amount of energy you have to spend trying to remember to check all of these different places all the time. Which leads into my final major point of job search management. If possible, pace yourself. The reason I say if possible is because there are times where people simply need immediate income. And I can't speak to any of our personal circumstances as to whether or not that is you. But I say this for the sake of, if you have the ability to take the job search at a reasonable pace, at a baseline pace. Maybe you have enough income that you're not in a position of needing to immediately find to get the first job that's available to you. If you're in that position, pace yourself, because otherwise the job search will burn you out very quickly. When you're looking at hundreds of jobs each day, and with each job, spending the time to try to see if it meets your needs, if it's the kind of job you want, if you think you would enjoy this job, how do you apply for this job? And then how do you make a resume for it? That's an exhausting process. So what I personally recommend is block out a chunk of time in your day, put this on your calendar in ink, that you will spend doing job searching. This may be 1 hour or 2 hours, for example. It might not be it shouldn't necessarily be every single day, maybe once every couple days, or if you're working full time and going to school for full time, it may only be on the weekends. Block out a chunk of time and tell yourself, this is the time that I will be spending doing my job searching. You spend that time focused on the job search, certainly doing all that you can in that time following these steps. And when that time is over, your job searching stops. You're not passively looking at job opportunities or looking for things on LinkedIn. You're not just spending any free time you have looking for these things, because again, that adds up over time and tends to lead to an accumulation of stress where you feel like you're constantly working at something. You need to spend some time away from the process so that you can make sure that you're taking care of yourself, which is something that Tony will spend a lot more time talking with you guys about in the next few minutes. And the last piece I want to say is just that, speaking to that last question I mentioned earlier, how do I network when I can't be in person with people? So what I recommend is that you leverage the virtual opportunities for networking as much as possible. Many of us do already have a LinkedIn account, as it is considered and becoming a more standard aspect of our social media presence in order to be considered employable. If you don't already have a LinkedIn profile, I do strongly suggest developing one. It's a relatively simple process to get the account created, and then you can start fleshing it out over time. But the reason for this is that you can also start making connections and developing your virtual network sooner than later. You can leverage your network in order to find opportunities that are virtual to set yourself up for success in your career. These can be from an informational perspective, learning from people in the job, in the know about what the job entails, and figuring out if a job is the right kind of job for you. Or it could even be trying to see if there are ways that you can find networking opportunities virtually. For example, the Career and Internship Center here at the University of Baltimore does offer career fairs each semester. We are offering them virtually right now. And certainly as we get closer to opening back up fully, we will be looking at doing in-person career fairs as well. But there are professional associations that do virtual career fairs, that do virtual networking webinars. So keeping those things in mind. The biggest one I would touch on is using LinkedIn's alumni tab. So if you're on LinkedIn, I always recommend following the University of Baltimore, as that gives you access to our alumni tab, which is basically a space where all of the alumni from the University of Baltimore who are registered on LinkedIn can be found. And you can go through and you can use different filters to search by people's major, by where they work now, by what field they work in. And you can find people with like-minded interests or at a similar stage in their careers to where you are, and you can make direct connections to them. Leverage the fact that you share a common educational experience with them. Maybe you got the same degree that they did, or your interests are simply identical, and reach out to them about potentially setting up an informational interview to learn more about their story. I find that the University of Baltimore's alumni tend to be very receptive and willing to support our current students. And so I always encourage this as as an easy way to build out your network organically, while also giving yourself potentially access to opportunities that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Also, just because stuff is being done virtually now, more people are expecting and receptive to virtual informational interviews, whereas it used to be, let's go, why don't we go get coffee at a local Starbucks, for example. Now reaching out and asking if somebody has 15 minutes to chat on Zoom is pretty normal. So alumni who are available through tools like this will be much more willing, in my opinion, to accept those opportunities and to try to provide you with the benefit of their experience. The final piece I would say here, utilize University of Baltimore's resources. Certainly, I do, of course, mean the Career and Internship Center, my office, which provides basically any career-related service that you would want. We offer them all still in a virtual capacity. We have transitioned our office pretty much entirely over to a virtual format, so we are available to help with any questions or concerns that you may have. This goes in the form of, we provide one-on-one coaching, we can provide career assessments, we help with resumes, cover letters, job searching, interviews, networking, developing a LinkedIn profile, internships, and so on and so forth. And of course, when I say utilize UBalt resources, I do also mean some of our other offices, including Tony's office, which is where I will now pass it off to him to talk a little bit more with you guys about effective stress management.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So yes, just to kind of piggyback before I start on my half of the presentation, I definitely encourage you, if you haven't already done so, make that LinkedIn profile. It's really a wonderful way for you to get your name out there. And as you develop your career, make sure you're updating it and adding that information in there, because a lot of times, depending on how you set it up, a lot of recruiters will use that to find folks for job opportunities. So that's a really good way to get noticed in that way. And then just kind of speaking briefly about what I do here at the university. So I am the clinical case manager in the Office of Student Support, and I oversee the Student Assistance Program, which we'll go into a little bit more depth later in today's presentation. But also know that in my role, I also work to connect students to other community resources and other offices at UBalt that may be helpful for you as far as any needs. And so kind of just highlighting that idea of stress and the urgency with what you may need as you're doing your job search process, we may be able to help alleviate or at least connect you with resources that might lessen that burden, allowing you to do that job process and pacing yourself a little bit more. So speaking about it, what is stress? And I know a lot of us know we can describe it. We can tell you we're stressed. We can tell family and friends, but what's a definition for it, right? Just to kind of have that vocabulary. And so, based off of this one definition, and this isn't the one all, the be all, but stress can be defined as a degree to which you feel overwhelmed or unable to cope as a result of pressures that are unmanageable. Now, everybody's level of stress is going to be a little bit different. Everybody's ability to deal with stress and what that means and what tools you have available to yourself is going to be different. And to kind of highlight this, I'm going to go to the next slide and kind of show you this curve. So every time that we talk about stress, we've always talked about it in negative terms, but is there such a thing as good stress? And the truth is there is. Thinking about it from an evolutionary psychology perspective, if you weren't stressed enough by certain stimuli, let's say hearing a tiger, right, or hearing a growling, and you're just perfectly laid back and you're just relaxed and everything's okay and there's no worries, you're going to get eaten, right? And then on the other end of the extreme, you have somebody who's hears that growl and is so panicked, so overwhelmed, so over worried, just can't control their anxiety, that they don't know how to act and they don't know where to act. They just freeze, or they don't make good decisions. They get eaten. And where we want to be in is in this kind of in the middle, right? The ideal zone, that first little part of the uptick where your either stress level is comfortable or you're in that optimal area where you're feeling the stress, but you're managing it and you're performing at your very best. The best metaphor I could give to that is maybe something for those who thinking about final exams, right? We're recording this right before final exam season kicks in. And so, those who don't feel any stress with their final exam may not be motivated or encouraged to study. And they're like, I'll be fine. And then you take the test and you find out, oof, I wasn't fine. On the flip side, you may be so worried about that test and so worried about how you're going to do in that exam that everything that you've worked hard over the last semester, it might be hard for you to recall it and remember it during the exam. So we always want to be in this little optimal zone. Now, what that looks like for each and every one of you who is watching this video at home is going to be different. Everybody has different curves. Some people can tolerate certain things and other people may not be able to tolerate other things. And that's perfectly normal, right? There is no one-stop shop or just one understanding of what stress can be. And it varies greatly depending people. So let's talk a little bit about what are the signs that you're stressed. And on the next slide, we can take a look at and seeing, here are some things. Now, again, when I talk about stress, when I talk about burnout, when I talk about these things, I do it in the vein that it is going to be different for every person, right? But here's some just general kind of helpful keys or hints that you may be feeling or experiencing too much stress, right? You're going to that other extreme to where you're going towards burnout as you're doing your job search. So emotional changes, right? You might be feeling more anxious, right? You might find yourself constantly thinking about, okay, what happens if I don't get this job? I put in 5 or 10 different applications. How come I haven't heard about anyone? You might get frustrated or angry, like, why isn't anyone calling me back? Or you might feel a little bit sad, right? Because you're really working your hardest to get a new job. You've done all this time here at U-Bolt to work and get those skill sets, and you're having difficulty finding a job, and it could be making you irritable. Now, and that's normal responses to this process. Physically, our body, some of us may respond more physically than we do emotionally to stress. So you might be finding that you're nauseous. You might be finding that you're having headaches, or you might feel your heart rate's beating fast, or you might feel your body tensing, right? Maybe you're getting more cramps in your shoulders or your back, things like that. Your body has a way of telling you that you're going under some stress. And then lastly, behavioral changes, right? So you may be having trouble concentrating. It's really, really hard to think when you're stressed. And part of that is just going back to that whole idea of fight or flight or freeze, that idea of survival, skills and what stress does for us, keeping us safe and healthy. Remembering things, sometimes stress can impact your sleeping. And I know during the pandemic, there's been a lot of articles written about this. But COVID and the trauma from COVID and the stress of the pandemic has really impacted the way people sleep. There's a lot of articles that are going out there talking about COVID dreams, right? Really, really intense dreams that normally you wouldn't have. And sometimes, when we're stressed, we don't have the energy to do the things that usually, help us recharge. So if you're a person who likes being around other pandemic, right? But B, maybe it's just phone calls to people or chatting with people on instant messenger, or chatting through people through WhatsApp, but you just don't have the energy, so you're starting to withdraw from them. And then also just increase in unhealthy coping habits. Throughout this whole time of the pandemic and throughout everything else that has been going on, there's a lot of statistics that have been showing an increases in alcohol use for a lot of different people, right? As they're trying to cope with this stress. And all of this is tied in to the background for what you are doing currently as you're looking for work. And so, again, this isn't the end all to be all to what these signs might be. So you may be showing stress differently, maybe showing up maybe only at home, but it's not showing up at school, or maybe showing up in your classes where you're having really difficulty at classes, but at home, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're a caregiver in another role, and you're knocking that out the park. So, keep the biggest thing I would tell you about this is to take a moment and reflect on yourself to say, okay, what does it look like when I'm stressed? And I love Daniel's recommendation of pacing yourself so that you're not constantly focusing on that and giving yourself a break from the job search. There's the rumination that comes with doing a job searches, especially if it's an urgent need to get employed as soon as you can be really detrimental to your mental, emotional, and physical health. And there has to be that one point, and you have to realize it for yourselves. When is it that I've done enough for that day, right? And finding what that number is. Some people, it might be 10 applications that day. Some other people, they might have the tolerance to do 20. And other people, it might be 5. Whatever your tolerance is for job applications before you're starting to feel that energy of what stress looks like to you, keep aware of that and make sure that you are keeping that in the back of your mind as you're working through this, and be okay. And if it's something where you have to chunk these job applications up throughout the day, whether it means you're doing 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, or you're taking a break in between them to also rest your eyes, right? All of this time of being on Zoom and everything is really impacting people's vision, because we're not used to looking at the screen that long. And it's a difference between when you're looking in Zooming meetings all day as opposed to using your phone. So there's all these different things that you really want to keep in mind as you're going through this. So the one thing that I want, and I hope that everyone who's watching this at home understands, is the ability to take a look at those signs of stress for them, learning what their own personal curve looks like so that they can keep themselves in that happy little green bar area of good stress. But also, I'm hoping you can walk away from this with some helpful hints on how to really care for yourself physically, emotionally, and what you call it, spiritually too. So just kind of changing gears a little bit, I do want to talk about some self-care and why it's important. So we'll go ahead to the next slide and take a look at that. So here's the thing about self-care, and this isn't just specific to the job search, but in general, when we have really important things, really emergent things that are taking our focus, right? It can be hard to take time for yourself when you're worried about paying your bills, right? Maybe you are finishing up, this is the year you're graduating from the University of Baltimore. And so now you have to figure out your new finances on how you're going to pay this rent or how you're going to pay that bill. And the only answer you can come up with is, I need to get a job. And so there's a lot of stress there. And so that is your zeroed in, hyper-focused moment. You are all about getting a new job. That's usually the moment when you're going to need to take some time for yourself. That's probably what you're going to need to do. And it seems counterintuitive, right? But it's also, I always use this metaphor. If you've just run like 10 miles and you're exhausted and now you have to run another 5, should you take a rest before you run the other 5, or should you continue running it? Most likely, if you keep running it, you're going to hurt yourself. And then not only are you not going to be able to finish that additional 5 miles, you're not going to be able to run again for quite some time while you're recovering. And self-care is kind of the same thing when you're doing job searching. If you burn yourself out, how good are your essays going to be? How good are your applications going to be? How focused are you going to be to the minute details of having to enter in your resume for the 10th time, even though it says they have an auto upload? It's the small errors when we are applying ourselves and applying to job applications that can sometimes hurt us or help us. And so it's really about that self-care so you can maintain that level of performance that's going to help you get to that next part in your career. So when we need self-care, we practice it the least, unfortunately. And the one thing I always talk to when I have these type of conversations with folks is you need to choose the level of activity for what matches your level of distress. The most dangerous thing, and I capitalized it here, is superficial self-care. So we've all seen the old Snicker commercials, or if you haven't, there's a Snicker commercial where someone's really into this monster and someone says, hey, you're being a real monster, here, have a Snickers bar, and then they calm down. Well, sometimes a Snickers bar is not going to cut it. So if it's taking a walk, right? And again, also, taking consideration your own environment. So if it's safe enough for you to go take a walk in your community, go take that walk around your community. If it's not, finding something else. But whatever you choose for your self-care activity, it has to match the level of distress. And also, here's the big thing. Again, self-care is non-negotiable. You can't not take care of yourself and think that you're going to have a healthy, fulfilling life. And it's not selfish to do this, right? It's self-love. And it's perfectly okay for you to take this time for yourself, even if you're doing a job search and you're having all this stress. And just making sure that you take time for yourself. So I know a lot of presentations on self-care share similar information and then they kind of end. So I want to actually give you some steps that might help you plan this out for yourself. So on the next slide, what you'll see are 9 steps that have been really helpful for me and other students that I've shared. So again, back to the idea, identify what activities that are healthy that help you feel your best. So not everybody's going to want to go for a 3 mile run, right? And I totally appreciate that, because how many people who jog smile? I don't see many, but they seem to enjoy it. That's what they tell me. Put it on your calendar, or if it's a phone reminder on your Android or your Apple phone, or if it's a post-it note, whatever you have to do, make that something that is actually a part of your time and commit to that time. Right. So if you put it on your calendar from like 11 to 10, I'm going to go binge watch a couple episodes of, I don't know, whatever show that you're watching. Okay, binge watch a couple of those episodes during that hour. Do not allow anyone else to take away that time. Now, obviously, that might be easier for some individuals than others, depending on what career you choose, right? If you're working as a crisis counselor, it's going to be a little bit harder to cut out that hour time if you get, tapped for that. But in that, and to the next point, if you work in a profession, or you're in a situation that doesn't allow you to cut out that time, sneak it in when you can, right? If you found, oh, hey, I had a meeting and it got canceled today, so I have this new hour, go take some self-care, right? Or if you had a job interview and you're getting ready to set up that job interview and the interview got canceled or it had to get rescheduled because someone on the interviewing committee wasn't available, you now have another hour. Instead of going into that hour and applying for another job, take that moment and relax and go, maybe review your notes, or the weather's getting better, so take some time to appreciate that. And creating healthy boundaries, right, is really important, because that also helps take care of yourself physically. So when I mean creating healthy boundaries, I mean boundaries for your life as far as your scheduling. I mean boundaries for your life as far as relationships with other people, right? Including family and friends. And I know that can be a difficult conversation to have, right? Because sometimes there's boundaries that we would like to create, but for one reason or another, we may not be able to do that. But making sure that you try to work in and do that so as much as you can. So let's say you're currently employed and you're working for trying to find a better job, and your job is a 9 to 5 job, but they're giving you tasks and assignments after 5. If you are able to do so, creating a healthy boundary and going, you know what, if it's 5 o'clock and it hits, even though you're working from home, or maybe you're at the site working there, making sure that it's like, you know what, this can get finished tomorrow. And just do something like that, and knowing which activities can be, or which tasks can be done tomorrow, and being okay with walking away. Again, taking care of yourself physically. So we are what we eat. So trying to eat healthy to the point that it's healthy, right? I'm not telling you to throw out your Oreo cookies or your sodas, but things in moderation. And checking in with yourself regularly. Like, again, when we talked about earlier about the signs and symptoms of stress, taking a look at yourself and checking in maybe once a week or maybe once a day, and just like, all right, how am I feeling right now? What am I feeling right now? How have I been interacting with friends and family? Like, how am I feeling physically? All of those different type of things. The other big one about making a self-care plan is taking a look at who's in your circle. So what do I mean by that? We all have friends. We may all have different types of friends groups, structures, or family group structures, or just general supports. And who we surround ourselves really helps influence how we feel and how we recover when we're stressed, and how we resolve or how we work through stress. And so we may have people that we very much care about, who we love a lot. But they might be someone who's kind of draining. Maybe they're going through a lot of really significant stressors in their own life, and you want to be a support for them, and that's great. But again, back to that idea of healthy boundaries, is where do you need to cut that line or draw that line from where, before you get overwhelmed with that person? And sometimes that's a really hard conversation to understand. And it might be a time for you to distance yourself from some people while you're recovering and taking care of yourself. I kind of go back to the metaphor of building a house on sand. If your foundation is not strong on taking care of yourself, it's going to be a lot harder for you to deal with different types of stressors, and not just the job search stress that comes from this process, but just other ones that happen in life. So make sure your foundation's solid and your house will always stand. And then the biggest thing is to be honest with yourself. So you have to be honest. You have to be honest about what you are aiming for when you're creating this type of self-care plan. You have to be honest about what you need. So again, going back to that whole superficial self-care is dangerous thing. It's like, well, I had 4 Oreo cookies today. All right, that's my self-care. Let me go do 10 or 15 more job applications. That's not going to be honest with yourself. don't get me wrong, Oreo cookies are great. I love them. They're not the healthiest thing for you, but is that really the thing that is going to be helpful for you? And knowing what your limits are and not expecting to meet the expectations of others based off of what you need to do and what you have to achieve. And obviously, the last thing is asking for help when we need it. And I don't just mean at reaching out to family or friends. I also mean talking about just your, professionals. So there might be a time where it might be appropriate for you to speak with a social worker or a professional counselor just to kind of manage and discuss about strategies. Therapy isn't just for people who are going over chronic, severe, significant issues. Therapy is also useful for people who are going through the daily stresses of daily living. And I always encourage people to do that. And you might have seen the next slide a second ago. So we're going to go ahead and transition to that because this is actually what I also wanted to highlight today. So we've talked a little bit about the signs of stress. We've talked about good stress. We've talked about maybe making this plan with those 9 steps. And now we're on to this last helpful hint, the asking for help. So please, 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 please do not forget that the University of Baltimore has the Student Assistance Program. And the program is basically, an employee assistance program, but it's for you, the students. And it's here 24/7 all year round. Now, if you were to call in and access this service and hear a phone tree for a company called BHS, you are at the right place because BHS is the vendor that the University of Baltimore works with to provide this program. They are not limited to Baltimore County, Baltimore City, or the state of Maryland. So they're national. And so there's a couple different things that they can help you with. So the first thing is they can do free financial planning over the phone. So let's say you're in that transitional period of graduating, trying to figure out what's next, they can help you there. They do free legal assistance. So like you can talk with a lawyer for 30 minutes, and then after that it's discounted. So like speeding tickets, small things. And then also they help out with like child care and elder care referrals. So they can help you find resources in your area to help support with that. They also do in the moment support. So, if you were feeling exceptionally overwhelmed or if you just needed to talk to someone and the usual support network that you use wasn't available, you can call them and someone's going to pick up the phone for you. And they even help out with short-term therapy. So up to 5 free sessions per incident. So don't feel like if you use this now, you're not going to be able to use it later in the year. You can use this service as many times as you need. And that's what's built into that. And I always encourage folks to do that. And the thing is, for the things that the SAP doesn't cover, right? So it might be you're experiencing housing instability, you're experiencing food insecurity, you're experiencing some other type of stressors that are impacting you. And all of this is impacting your ability to focus on the job search, right? Because it's kind of hard to worry about those things when you don't know what is going to happen with rent or food, right? That's where I come in and the Office of Student Support comes in. So going back to Daniel's point about accessing your network, accessing your support system here at the University of Baltimore, we're here for that. So if you wanted to access the student assistance program, on the next slide, what you'll see is a couple different ways to do that. And so the first one is there's actually an online portal. So if you take a look at the online portal, and you can find that on your MyUB page. So if you went on your home page on the right-hand side with all the tools and stuff on there, at the very bottom list of the tools, there is a direct link to the online portal. You can chat with someone online if you wanted to, but you can also call them. And so the number's here, and the number is 1-800-327-2251. And again, that's a confidential free resource. So nothing you share with the hotline, with the exception of maybe if you were self-harming, going to hurt someone else, or if it was something that was related to child abuse or elder abuse, gets reported. So those are the only limits to that. Everything else stays with the SAP, and nothing is shared between the SAP and the University of Baltimore unless those conditions are met. So, use them anytime. You can call them at 3 a.m. on July 4th, and that's really, it's there for you. But as I'm sure Daniel's going to bring up as we get ready to close out this presentation, we're both here to support everyone during this job search. I know there's going to be some challenges with this, and there was challenges back in 2007 during the Great Recession. And the economy did bounce back and things changed. It's unfortunate that sometimes it might take a little bit longer than we would like it. But I hope some of these tips and hints that we've shared with you today are helpful for you in regards to managing the stress that comes from job searching, but also just stress in general. And if you have any other questions for those watching at home, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can contact me through my email, which is tdulaney@ubolt.edu. Or you can call me, and you can call me at 410-837-5159, or just shoot an email to the general email for the student support office at studentsupport@ubolt.edu. I'm always happy to be here to help support you, and our office is 12 months, so we're here even during the summer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tony. And I would definitely echo all of the same points that Tony mentioned. I think he gave us some fantastic tools for effective, stress management, and kind of really talking clearly to the importance of, self-care is a term that we hear bounced around a lot, but it's not just a buzzword. It is something that has to be a lifestyle decision. It can't just be something that you do one time and then you're good. You have cared and you're good to go. But speaking to the last piece of what he mentioned as well, the Career and Internship Center can also be accessed through your MyUB homepage. If you go to your profile page, you can actually find not only an academic advisor, but you will also see that you have a career advisor listed under there. So you can directly contact our office that way. We also do have a page on the ubolt.edu website. And for myself, I can also be reached out to by email or phone. My email is dbowley@ubolt.edu. And my phone number is 410-837-5441. So you can reach me anytime in any of those, and I can either provide you with direct support myself or refer you to your appropriate career coach, because we do have career coaches that work with every major across the University of Baltimore. And so, we thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. We hope that it was helpful and insightful for you. And if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of our offices. We know, as Tony mentioned, this is a relatively unprecedented time. The Great Recession is probably the closest comparison that I can think of in many of our lifetimes. But even with that, it's a new normal, as many of us have said, and that means thinking about new normal ways for stress management and for effective job searching. So we certainly thank you so much for your time, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.